Thus, FP&A interview questions for freshers. Simple, teacher-style answers you can use. These are the 25 most common fresher questions, each with what interviewers check, how to answer, and a ready-to-use sample. Or ready-to-use sample. What is FP&A? What it tests? Basic role awareness. How to answer? Say planning, budgeting, forecasting, and monthly reporting. Mention decision support. Sample answer. FP&A stands for Financial Planning and Analysis. It plans revenue, costs, and cash. It builds budgets and forecasts. It prepares monthly performance reports. FP&A helps leaders know what happened and what may happen next. How is FP&A different from accounting? What it tests, distinguishing functions. How to answer. Contrast backward-looking accuracy with forward-looking insight. Show dependence on accounting. Sample answer. Accounting records past transactions and ensures compliance. FP&A uses those numbers to predict the future. Accounting focuses on accuracy. FP&A focuses on insight and decisions. Both teams must work closely together. Explain the basic structure of a P&L. What it tests. Statement fluency. How to answer. Walk revenue, COGS, gross profit, OPEX, EBITDA, net income. Mention drivers. Sample answer. A P&L begins with revenue. Subtract cost of goods sold to get gross profit. Then subtract operating expenses to get EBITDA. After interest and tax, you have net income. Margins change with price, volume, and mix. What is budgeting? What it tests. Planning basics. How to answer. Define annual plan, department inputs, and consolidation. Mention approval. Sample answer. Budgeting sets targets for the year. Departments submit revenue, hiring, and cost assumptions. FP&A consolidates these into a single plan. Leadership reviews and approves the final budget. It becomes the company's financial roadmap. What is forecasting? What it tests. Forward-looking thinking. How to answer. Define periodic updates, use of trends and frequency. Emphasize agility. Sample answer. Forecasting predicts near-term results. It uses recent trends, seasonality, and business updates. FP&A refreshes forecasts monthly or quarterly. Forecasts help leaders spot risks early and adjust plans. What is variance analysis? What it tests. Analytical approach. How to answer. Explain actual versus budget forecast and drivers like price or volume. End with action. Sample answer. Variance analysis compares actual results to budget or forecast. We break differences into price, volume, mix, timing, or one-offs. Then we explain the cause and suggest any corrective action. The goal is clearer decisions next month. Why is forecasting important? What it tests. Value understanding. How to answer. Focus on early warnings, cash planning, and decision support. Sample answer. Forecasts warn leaders about risks before they grow. They guide cash planning, hiring, and investments. Good forecasting reduces surprises and helps the company act sooner. 1 point. What is the difference between fixed and variable costs? What it tests. Cost behavior basics. How to answer. Define fixed as stable, variable as volume linked, and show why it matters. Sample answer. Fixed costs stay the same regardless of sales. For example, rent. Variable costs change with volume. For example, raw materials. Knowing the split helps predict margins when sales move. What does revenue forecasting mean? What it tests. Revenue mechanics. How to answer. Mention pipeline, conversion, seasonality, and pricing. Keep it simple. Sample answer. Revenue forecasting estimates future sales using the sales pipeline, conversion rates, and pricing. We also account for seasonality and renewals. For freshers, simple logic and clear assumptions are key. How do you analyze costs? What it tests? Structured thinking. How to answer? Break into categories, ask why, and check for one-offs. Sample answer. I group costs into payroll, marketing, tech, and operations. Then I compare this month to last month and to budget. I look for one-time items and ask why numbers changed. That helps decide next steps. End. What is working capital? What it tests? Cash basics. How to answer. Define AR, inventory, AP, and cash impact. Use simple terms. Sample answer. Working capital is money needed for daily operations. It includes accounts receivable, inventory, and accounts payable. Faster collections or lower inventory frees cash. Better working capital improves liquidity. What tools do FP&A teams commonly use? What it tests? Tool awareness. How to answer? List Excel, BI tools, ERPs, and planning platforms. Keep it realistic. Sample answer. FP&A uses Excel for modeling, Power BI or Tableau for dashboards, and ERP systems like SAP or NetSuite for actuals. Larger teams use Anaplan or Adaptive for planning. Basic familiarity with these tools helps a fresher. What Excel skills do you have? What it tests? Practical ability. How to answer? Mention key functions, pivots, and clean file habits. Sample answer. I use VLOOKUP and index match, SUMIFs, and pivot tables. I build simple charts and use conditional formatting. I keep tabs labeled and avoid hard-coded numbers. Accuracy matters more than fancy formulas. Explain a simple financial model you've built, what it tests, logic, and hands-on practice. How to answer. Describe a basic model, inputs, outputs, and learnings. Sample answer. I built a revenue model using price times quantity. I added discounts and returns to refine final sales. The model showed how volume or price shifts change revenue. It was simple, but it taught clear driver thinking. End. What is MIS? What it tests? Reporting basics. How to answer. Define Management Information System and what it contains. Sample answer. MIS stands for Management Information System. It is the monthly report pack with revenue, costs, KPIs, and trends. Readers use MIS to review performance and decide next steps. End. Why do you want to work in FP&A? What it tests, motivation and fit. How to answer? Be honest about interest in numbers and business. Link to learning. Sample answer. I enjoy working with numbers and solving business problems. FP&A lets me learn across functions and influence decisions. I want to grow my analytical skills and help the company plan better. End. What is a KPI? What it tests? Metric awareness. How to answer. Define KPI and give 2 to 3 examples tied to business goals. Sample answer. KPI means Key Performance Indicator. It measures an important outcome like revenue growth or churn. KPIs tell whether the business is improving or not. Give an example of a KPI. What it tests. Practical metric choice. How to answer. Pick a KPI relevant to the role and explain its importance. Sample answer. Revenue growth rate measures how fast sales increase. Gross margin shows profitability per sale. Customer churn indicates retention in subscription models. Each KPI informs different decisions. How would you explain financial data to a non-finance person? What it tests. Communication ability. How to answer. Use simple terms, one chart and one conclusion. Sample answer. I use plain language and one clear chart. I state the main idea first, then show supporting numbers. I avoid jargon and focus on what action is needed next. How do you manage deadlines? What it tests. Work habits. How to answer. Describe planning, prioritization, and communication. Sample answer. I make a daily priority list and break tasks into steps. I flag risks early and update my manager. I use calendar reminders and keep buffers for unexpected work. What is the purpose of a budget versus a forecast? What it tests: concept clarity. How to answer: give a one-line comparison and a short rationale. Sample answer: a budget is the planned target for the year. A forecast is the updated view of what will actually happen. Budget is fixed. Forecast is flexible. What is the role of FP&A in decision-making? What it tests: functional impact. How to answer: explain how FP&A quantifies options and shows consequences. Sample answer: FP&A shows the numbers behind choices. It compares options and forecasts outcomes. Leaders use that information to pick the best course. End. Do you know any financial ratios? What it tests: basic financial literacy. How to answer: list 3-4 simple ratios and one-line definitions. Sample answer: gross margin shows profit per sale. Net margin shows final profitability. Current ratio measures short-term liquidity. Debt to equity shows financial leverage. How do you ensure accuracy in your work? What it tests: attention to detail. How to answer: mention checks, cross-verification, and documentation. Sample answer: I double-check formulas and totals. I use cross-checks like month-over-month and year-over-year comparisons. I document sources so others can verify my numbers. End. Do you have any questions for us? What it tests: curiosity and cultural fit. How to answer: ask about team, tools, and first-month expectations. Sample answer: could you tell me about the FP&A team structure? Which tools does the team use day to day? What would success look like in the first 3 months? These answers are short, clear, and ready for interviews. Use the samples as templates. Then, add one personal example to each where possible. Speak slowly. Pause on ellipses. And let your confidence show.